Moving to the open mic session. What a 4-hour, I'm exhausted. I don't know how you're feeling, but there's just so many territories that we covered today, and they weren't, as I promised, skips in the park. These were some tough ground to travel. And when you think of what we've covered over the last 4 hours, and from Kelly's opening remarks, where she really set the stage in terms of launching a movement, scientific process, behavioral economics, not just tackling little things like, can I grow my market share, but really important things like stakeholder capitalism and the climate crisis and this sense of food waste, why people are going hungry. And so what we want to do now is just really bring back 4 of this brain trust together. Kelly's going to join us, Michael, David's, and of course, Nathaniel or Nate. And we're going to just have an open conversation about what's next. And I think we're going to get the 2 of them on the screen. And so, great. David, can you hear me all right? I think he's just coming on.
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Good. Listen, fantastic conversation. If I can, I want to tell you a story and have you just sort of comment on it. I was hosting a global payment conference, and this guy was talking about going back home to his he happened to be doing a thing in Shanghai. He went to visit his parents who lived in a little village in China. As he's walking into their house, he noticed a camera right over their front door. And he just couldn't understand why his parents, who were very simple people, would have this security camera. And he walked in and they explained, well, no, the Chinese government has installed these cameras everywhere. And he said, the look on my face, it just, I drained. I couldn't believe that you were under such a privacy attack. And he said, what'd you think about it? And they said, well, actually, we're really happy because there's no longer any crime. So I'm curious from your point of view, as you start thinking about intuition and adopting technology and marching in step with it, is it really going to be due to personalizing the benefits to the individual? And if so, what role can behavioral economics play in moving things forward so that we view those machines and artificial intelligence as an opportunity, as something that can enlighten society versus thrust humans in the dark ages?
Right. I love your example. Oh, my headphones got disconnected again. I love your example because it highlights something that I was trying to say about the driverless car, the deeply different intuitions when the benefit is clearly to me and maybe not to society. So maybe that is one route to have people adopt some of these technologies, to highlight in a selfish way the benefits to them. And I think actually that's how most of these things are marketed. So we have Ring doorbells that we install. I have a Ring doorbell right in my house. I love it because I get to see everything that's going on in my house. I don't like it so much that everybody else has one and that there are probably video records of me walking my dog every single day. That sort of bothers me. So there has to be the right balance, I think, between emphasizing the societal benefit and perhaps emphasizing the selfish benefit, because when sometimes they clash and people are more than willing to actually abandon their personal benefit because they think that it might actually come with some harm. Like I may just not like that there are video records of me walking all through my neighborhood from my neighbors.
Is there an arc or is there a storyline where people can erase the intuitions of the past and be much more open-minded to the fact that, again, they're not, these machines and artificial intelligence and network of learning aren't necessarily foes, but they can be friends? Is there a way that you approach it from a scientific way, that in a staged approach, or is it all or nothing?
Well, there are hard intuitions to shake, but I do think that one of the best ways to do this is to make these algorithms hidden. I mean, so in some sense, like I was mentioning, there are a ton of ways that algorithms are aiding in our the decisions made by the powers that be all around us. It's really when they become salient to us that we start having a problem. So making them sort of invisible, or making them so innocuous, and with such a clear advantage, like Spotify suggesting new playlists for me. The problem is, if we find out that Spotify is selling our data, then those intuitions can kick in, and sure, they can be overridden by just pure reason, but we have a whole body of research in behavioral economics and psychology showing that overriding some of these intuitions with reason is very difficult. And there are individual differences. Some people do it better than others, but it is an uphill battle.
So Kelly, let me go to you for a second, because I'm interested from you. If your firm was brought in and I really wanted to sell a driverless car, or my network of learning, or this technology, whether it's the audience was a consumer or the employee, how would you approach that problem, knowing that, as David said, that these intuitions are locked, they're almost in prison? How would you open those bars and release consumers so they have much more open-minded towards it?
Yeah, the path to adopting a new technology is not always that straightforward. People are quick to adopt some technologies that surprise us and slow to adopt others. And we've seen this in different domains. We've seen this in some very important projects, such as a new kind of medical device that transforms the hemodialysis experience. That's for people who have kidney damage or kidney disease and need to receive dialysis on a regular basis. The traditional way of doing that is to go to a clinic, receive your treatment there, and your life is very much imprisoned by that routine. A company has made a very significant investment in a new kind of technology that allows people to do that at home while they sleep, allowing them to travel, to get better outcomes with a device that's kind of the size of a mini fridge. Better outcomes, better longevity, more freedom, not having to go to a clinic. How is this a thing? How is this a problem in terms of that adoption? But that adoption journey is very, very complex. It's not as simple as, hey, this is a better device that's going to improve the quality of your life from day one. And if that is an uphill battle, imagine how complex it is with other things. So our study in this project required us to go underneath the hood of understanding what those points of resistance are. And sometimes it's quite surprising. Sometimes it's just not understanding the perception of how big this device will be in my home. It could be people being afraid of bringing something so medical into their home and not wanting to medicalize their home space. So sometimes the solutions then are nothing to do with technology or education about those outcomes that I was talking about. And it's about making that medicalization of that device seem less intrusive. It starts to be a matter of how do we bring in better, friendlier design around the device. And it becomes aspects of the human psychology to facilitate that adoption. That said, technology can be used for evil purposes. It has to be done for noble reasons. The data transparency, the way the data is being used, the way that technology is being used, can be very dangerous for individuals and for society. So we need to make sure that as citizens, we are pushing back on where technology is being used for the wrong reasons. So that skepticism that we see sometimes, but not other times, that resistance to invasion of privacy or misuse of our data, I think that's another intuition where people are rather misguided. So it's not just about adopting technology always just for the appeal sake of a particular thing, but patients, citizens, excited enthusiasts of technology always need to make sure that we are understanding the technology, so we're adopting the right technology for the right reasons.
It's interesting. Michael, I want to go to you next if I can. I always sketch out little things. I'm a terrible drawer, but to me, it's just how I really store metaphors. I love what you talked about with the well versus the river. And we went over it so quickly. And I think to me, it really brought to light what you're doing with Q in terms of reimagining the consumer, but more importantly, reimagining the creative process where you're still bringing in the beauty of the art, but with the power of the science. Could you take us a little bit, explain that a little bit more?
Well, the philosophy itself is a philosophy of collaboration. And when I first read the book on Seikatsu Katsushar, the metaphor didn't immediately wasn't immediately understandable to me, but essentially it's got a double meaning. If you recall, Tony, when I was explaining about Seikatsu Katsushar earlier on, and about how we try and look at people as Seikatsu Katsushar rather than as consumers or users, in other words, look at them as human beings, the primary aspect of the philosophy is indeed that you're actually not just speaking to people at a distance and just trying to sell them something. You're actually trying to engage them in something that's going to improve their lives. It's actually a long topic of conversation in its own right, because you can ask yourself the question in certain ways whether people should be, in fact, trying to sell people certain things. I mean, I've recently spent a lot more time in the UK, and I'm very saddened by the amount of betting advertising that's going on. But anyway, so I'm not always saying it's for a good thing. But essentially, the first meaning of Seikatsu Katsushar is a proximity to people and looking at them as rounded human beings. But an ancillary aspect of the philosophy is on the creative process. And this is where the well and the river comes in to some degree. The well is essentially just a place, historical Japanese place, where in villages people would congregate, just as today people congregate in other places, even in just in kitchens, if it's in the family, or if it's in the pre-COVID at least, in pubs or market squares or wherever, and would essentially communicate with one another and create things, whether it's just creating a conversation, whether it's creating something more than that. And so it denotes a collaborative, creative process. The river is essentially the corollary of that, which is if you don't do that, then you're essentially building a barrier between yourself and whoever it is you're actually dealing with, whether it is selling something to that person or whether it's actually trying to communicate with them. And that barrier is often insurmountable insofar as developing a good creative solution. And certainly it's going to be deficient in understanding who it is that you're selling to. So the philosophy is multifaceted, operates at different levels, but it's fundamentally a philosophy of gathering. It's a philosophy of understanding. It's a philosophy of depth. And for all of those reasons, it's a great North Star for any creatively driven enterprise.
And another sort of adjacent question that we talked earlier about Kelly Peters and BEworks and the fact and behavioral economics as being a way to help to validate, legitimize, and as you call it, almost this new creative renaissance, almost the Charlie Saatchi, Margaret Thatcher days, where leaders were in step with people that could creatively animate vision. Do you think that the leaders out there are ready for this? Because it does require a restructuring, a rethinking, and a reimagination, not just in how you see the consumer, but how you see the role of innovation happening within an organization.
I think they are ready for it, but they may not know it. Ultimately, when I've observed a couple of times in my life a a really impressive performance by a creative organization. You mentioned Charlie Saatchi. Charlie and Morris and their team in the 1980s did an absolutely phenomenal job at that particular time for the advertising industry. They really did, for a period of time, I would say from around 1980, probably through to the mid-90s, really blaze a trail for the power of creativity and what it could mean to organizations. And it wasn't just advertising, although people remembered Saatchi and Saatchi as it was then, as an advertising agency primarily, but they applied their minds to all sorts of problems that didn't always have an advertising outcome. And we haven't got time to go into the mechanisms that they used, but they were essentially driven by very talented people. I think when one looks at what we're trying to do and the role of BEworks in it, we're trying to do the same thing. I mean, we may not be able to do it with quite the elan of the Saatchi brothers of the 80s, although I think we have some pretty impressive organizations and people. But we're embracing new subjects at Q. We're embracing a different way. And BEworks, which is the leader in behavioral economics, is a part of that particular process, a very, very important part of it. Sometimes a project will need to lead with it and sometimes not. But at the end of the day, it is about providing the reassurance of the quality of thinking that goes into the solutions that we provide. To that degree, we aren't that different to Saatchi and Saatchi of the 1980s. Some of what we're doing is similar, some maybe a little bit further away. They weren't promoting behavioral economics back then, but I suspect in their own way, they were doing something that was a good proxy for it. So the answer is yes, it is needed. No, not everybody understands that it's needed.
Thank you. Nate, I want to go to you because if there's an underlying chord that was played throughout today, it was trust. And that, that to get people to believe, to trust, to behave, it's just not waving a magic wand. You've really got to start using a lot of what we talked about today, the scientific process, behavioral economics. You spent a lot of time talking about employees. In your sense, because I think a lot of people are really, we talked about it earlier, but I want to bring this back, are waking up to the reality is things will never be back to normal. People aren't going to come in and march 9 to 5. People aren't going to necessarily look at a career for life. People aren't necessarily going to work full time. All the stuff that was starting to happen as COVID's accelerated. What advice can you give to the people in the audience as they come to terms with that? How do they approach it so that their culture remains vibrant, exciting, purposeful, and a tiebreaker?
I think one of the most important aspects of this is embracing that things never being the same might be a good thing, and welcome the opportunity to reimagine what the future of behavior might look like, and to dig deeply into the insights that we've already amassed from the scientific literature, and to imagine what we might find out tomorrow. If there were one thing that I think we can agree we can trust on is that humans are an incredibly innovative species. When we look at our history, we see massive technological innovation, but we also see the rise and popularization of science itself. So to me, the fact that we have made it to this point using these incredible minds and brains and created such an advanced society tells me that the future of behavior is arguably even more exciting, and the potential that lies before us is incredible.
So Kelly, we started with you this morning, and I want to end with you because early on, I was probably sounded very grandiose to the audience when I said, and I know this because I know you, your eyes are shining, your heart's beating, and you said, I want to create a movement. I'm not here to sell a campaign, or I want us to really put a dent in humanity, a positive dent. How do you feel how today went? And people that leave, if even one person did something different, what would it be tomorrow morning that you would say, again, that was time well spent.
Well, first of all, I hope that they can see that we can transform society and the economy through scientific thinking that's been powered by the rich behavioral insights. I hope that people see that bias plays an invasive role in every decision that we make, but there are ways to kind of root that out to help us get to better decisions. But behavioral economics doesn't stop there. It's not just this whole sort of encyclopedia of biases that you're just sort of confronted with. It's like, that's not the first realization of this field. It's actually recognizing that those very biases can be used to help us. You know, Nate described this as a actually important opportunity for change. And you did that as well earlier when you talked about the pandemic being kind of this disruptive moment. It's about recognizing that there are these moments for change that can happen, and that behavioral economics and scientific thinking actually gives us the tools to drive that change and to measure its impact on the world. That triumvirate, that three-part tool set of behavioral economics, I think, is something that can give us great hope about the scale of the impact that we can have on the world, and that everyone has a role to play in that.
So I want to warn you, in the next 30 seconds, you might find what I'm about to do to be cheesy. But I don't believe it is. I really, when Michael and we talked about the Avengers, we talk about people that really want to make a positive force. I had someone go out and in the break and buy a cape. And they came back with a very gold cape that I want to present to you as the launch of this movement. And I would love this cape to become symbolic, that every year you present it to a client that best embodies everything you talked about, whether the bias is to erase biases or to take advantage of biases, but in doing so, to put a beautiful positive dent on humanity. I am so honored to be the host of the first, and let me adorn you with this cape here. I hope I don't ruin your glasses here. There we are. This is the cape of change, and I want clients to be wearing this from here on in, because today we launched a movement. Thank you for joining us at BEworks, Shaping the Future, and you rock a gold cape.
Awesome. Thank you all so much.